Hey, this is The Rest with Joel Kovacs. How you doing? The rest of my thoughts, the rest of our church, and with a little bit of help, hopefully some rest for our souls. Disclaimer, this is not a sermon, if you will. These are my thoughts, and these are my interests, and these are your thoughts and your interests. The rest is a time for open and safe opinions and dialogue. And for the rest of the people in the church, some of their ideas, some of the great people, some of the thoughts that I didn't get to finish with messages and the underlying commentaries on all kinds of stuff. And today, episode 15, we're going to continue a little mini series on mental health, because May is Mental Health Month. And if you didn't listen to episode 13 and 14, I had Katie Kovacs, my wife, on, mental health professional. Go listen to those. They're great about her story and mental health in the church. And then today, my special guest is Tony Yucus. How you doing, Tony?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. Tony is a mental health professional, and he's going to tell us specifically in what area. But Tony is also just an all-around good dude, and he's married. He's married to our full-time staff member here, Emma, who was Emma Sipes.
Yes,
and now is Emma Yucus. And for those in the Five14 Church family, Emma Sipes' daughter, Kenny Sipes, who is the founder of the Roosevelt.
Yep.
And so Tony and Emma, how long have you guys been married?
Been married 5 years now.
5?
Yep. You did our wedding.
I know,
years
it was 5 years?
Yeah.
In, where was it?
We were in Princeton, Illinois.
Yeah,
in the middle of nowhere.
Wasn't that New Year's Eve?
Yes. And the Buckeyes were playing.
And the Buckeyes were playing Clemson. And they got destroyed 35-3 or something.
Yeah.
Which you were glad.
I mean, I wasn't glad, but,
Well, you're from Illinois.
Correct.
So you are a fanboy, right?
Yes.
You love the Fighting Illini.
I do.
Well, you have one of my probably one of your best memories, one of my worst memories as a Buckeye fan.
Yeah.
I think it was in 2003.
Yeah, Juice Williams.
Yeah. I was at that game. Were you there?
No.
I was at that game. He was good. He was good, but he was not like this great passer. He had this one pass that just was way too high, over top of the safety. The guy got behind, and there was nothing special about it. We just broke coverage, and then they scored a touchdown, and it was like, what in the world? What are we doing here? But that guy was good, man. Anyway. That was bad because that was after we won the Natty, right? Mm-hmm. And then we lost a couple games.
Yep.
And you were happy.
Yeah, I mean, I was also 10, so.
You were 10. How do you feel about, Kofi?
I love him.
He's the man.
Yeah.
Are you disappointed with how?
Yes. I'm very disappointed.
What'd they do? Did they lost in the Big Ten final to Iowa? Is that right?
Not the final.
Huh?
Not the final.
Okay, who did they lose to?
We lost to Iowa.
To Iowa.
Believe, yeah.
And then what'd they do, round 2?
Yeah, again.
Man, they are too good for that.
Yeah.
The Big Ten, frustrating.
Anyway,
enough of that. Well, so Tony's here, and Tony, typically what I do is I do a little bit of recapping from this week's message, kind of the rest of the message, the footnotes, and I would love to have you along for that, and then we'll dive into your world a little bit.
Cool.
And so this is we started a new series at the church because we're in a season of servanthood, so kind of mixing things here, mental health and servanthood, not completely mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. So this is Footnotes. And the footnotes for this time, what we did is I really talked about this word koinonia that's in the Bible that is usually translated, partnership or fellowship, and how I had recently read that Paul's intentions with the word were to go beyond just fellowship. They really were a special bond that is created between a local body and someone who is in some type of mission field. Because Paul uses the word in a sense of a unique partnership that he has with the Philippian church that is giving him gifts while he's in prison. and how those gifts do something for him, not just because they help him while he's in the midst of being in jail, but also because of who they're from. And when you get a gift from someone that means something that way to you, it's almost like they're with you, And so we talked about that, and we talked about how the disciples were asking Jesus about what servanthood was, or really they weren't asking what servanthood was about. They were asking him if they could sit next to him in the kingdom. And Jesus basically says, you can't, those seats are already taken. And what he's alluding to is the cross, and how there's going to be criminals there, and how him going to the cross is what it means to be glorified. That the king and the crown and the kingdom of God and the cross are connected, in that what they thought glorification meant was sitting on a throne, and what he was going to show them is that the type of leader I am is a servant leader. And so if you didn't get that, but then what we're going to do in our church, and this is really all I'll do with footnotes today, is just give a brief review, but then encourage everybody that over the next couple of weeks, we have 3 guest speakers to come in and talk about servanthood. And then we're going to have the majority of our partners here on the 15th. And I want people to have the opportunity to get to know them a little bit more, a little bit deeper, so that maybe they connect with them directly, and they go beyond just, giving money to the church, but they connect with these partners that are, and they know them, and then they get moved with compassion because they love that person. They care what they're going through so much. So I would say I saw a little bit of koinonia in the, there was a recent story. I think I told it a couple podcasts ago, but there's a guy in our church who, his friend works at an orphanage. Now this is going to connect with you because one of the great parts of you and your wife's story, I'll let you tell, is adoption. But did you hear the story? This could be too much. I don't know. I want to overwhelm you. Did you hear this?
Are you referencing Scott?
Yes.
Yeah.
You remember that story? Okay. What a powerful story.
Yeah.
So he has I think a college roommate who worked at an orphanage, and then another one of his college roommates got kids from that orphanage.
I think what he said was his college roommate adopted kids from that orphanage, and
that's it.
That's how he's connected to that orphanage.
So his college roommate adopted kids from an orphanage in Ukraine, and then that orphanage got destroyed in the war.
Yes.
And Scott came up on stage to pray for Ukraine, and I think what you saw when he was standing up here, he wept. He was moved because of the connectivity.
Yeah.
So I think that's koinonia, right? It's like I know that person so well that while they're on the other side of the globe or in the other town or wherever they are, what's happening to them is happening to me. Similar to the movement of connection with Christ. What's happening to Christ is happening to me. My suffering, his suffering, I'm joining in his suffering. So they call that the fellowship. Even Paul says that he wants to know Christ and the power of his resurrection and the fellowship of his suffering, like to be in this thing in a way that we are really one body, right? So if the hand hurts, then it hurts me because it's my hand.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think that's a pretty cool idea, and I really hope that people connect with our church that way. So anyway, any other thoughts on that? You don't have to have any or any, but did you hear that message?
I did
this weekend.
Last week, yeah.
What do you think? What do you?
No, I agree. I think something we talk about in the mental health field, and especially I'll get a little bit into my background and what I do for a living.
Right.
But we talk about connection, how that's such a major part of recovery from from mental health and substance abuse and all that. We talk about having that connection and that fellowship with other people, and having a support system is just massive. If you don't have that, if you're isolated, things don't bode well.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great perspective on it. Yeah. So we're going to jump into mental health and Tony right now. Today he is our special guest and our aficionado. This is kind of obnoxious music.
Yeah, no, I like it though.
You like it?
Yeah.
You like it? It's just like, you're here, man. Welcome.
Yeah. I feel like,
ladies and gentlemen, Tony Yucus. There it is.
Yeah, that's good. It's good timing.
So go ahead, Tony. What do you do? What is mental health, and what do you do in the field?
So so mental health. I kind of like what Katie said on episode 13 that I listened to a little bit ago about mental health is, it's kind of hard to explain, right? I mean, but it's about the overall well-being of your emotional state. I think that's the biggest thing that I can kind of peg with that. Is just emotional well-being. What I do for a living, I am a independent chemical dependency counselor. And also an LPC, so a licensed professional counselor. Most of my work is in the addictions field. I'm a supervisor for 2 residential inpatient units that clients usually stay around 28 days in. And we do substance abuse treatment there. I have about 67 beds under me and about 15 counselors or so. So I do most of the supervision and everything for a good chunk of our residential. Yeah.
I mean, so people who are coming to you in your work in your specific location, what's got them to that point?
So a lot of our clients that we serve are low socioeconomic status or no socioeconomic status. They are, most of them are homeless or struggle with houselessness. So it really, that's what drives a lot of people to come in. Obviously, it's substance use that has led them to that point. But a lot of our clients that come in are looking for that. We're one of the only places in Franklin County that will do inpatient treatment and detox without having insurance.
Wow. Do you want to say where it is?
Yeah. I work at Maryhaven. So we're a fairly large nonprofit for what we do. So we do, we have a lot of services, but where I work is specifically residential, but a lot of clients, we have a central intake program where we're one of the only places that you can come for addiction treatment in Franklin County, where if you show up, you're not going to get turned down because you don't have insurance.
Wow. We're
funded by the Adam H. Board of Franklin County. So that's funded through taxpayers, which is just amazing.
Right. It's just a steady, consistent. So that supplies
we're able to help
How many people are there total clients?
At residential?
Yeah, residential.
Right now we have, let's see. So we have one unit that has 36, another unit has 31 beds.
Now that's just substance abuse?
Yes, this is all substance abuse.
Oh, so that's all. Do they have other beds or residential wings there?
We have 3 residential wings at Alum Creek location.
Okay.
I run 2 of them.
Okay.
So we have a 36 bed, a 31 bed, and a 24 bed.
Okay.
And
chemical dependency is what that's for.
Yes,
I see.
Absolutely.
And then outpatient.
We have tons of outpatient. That's not counting our detox location on South High Street that we have as well. That has detox and central intake. So that has even more beds where they go there first, and then they come to us once they are stable off withdrawal management. So yeah.
So explain what's happening when someone is chemically dependent.
Yeah. So when it comes to addiction, it hijacks those neural pathways. I think Katie was talking about the amygdala and what that does and the reward pathways in your brain. So when someone is using substances constantly, the way I like to describe it is like it's like a river, right? If you have water running through it, right, it's going to start carving out, and rivers get bigger and bigger and bigger as they go, right? Just because you take the water away doesn't mean that the river's gone. And that's what we see when people are in recovery, is that the river's still there, the riverbed's still there, but the water, the substance that they were using, is gone, right?
So they're freaking out.
Yep.
That's the withdrawal. It's like, it doesn't feel normal not to have water flowing down this river.
The river wants to be full, right? I mean, it wants to have, so that's the way I like to use that as a neural pathway kind of metaphor about what addiction does to the brain. It literally hijacks the brain to think that, drugs or alcohol are more important than, eating, sleeping, breathing. Like it wraps everything up.
How does it go from substance and starting the river to dependency, what's going on there? Like, where does it become chemically dependent?
Yeah. So a lot of times, that has to do with a genetic predisposition. But also, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be that.
Like what? Like explain that. Like, so someone is an alcoholic and they just, what does it mean? They drink alcohol and what happens?
So yeah. Are you talking about like the genetic predisposition?
Yeah, genetic
sure.
predisposition.
So, I mean, that can be like any number of things from, mom and dad struggled with alcoholism, or, drug dependence, whatever that may be. But certain people are wired in different ways, right? Every brain's wired different. I mean, we all know that. Like, so, I mean, I think what you're asking is what's the question?
Why do some people, when they drink alcohol, have that snap of, I can't live without this?
Yeah.
Like, what's happening in their brain? What's going on that's different than me?
Yeah.
Because I'm not an alcoholic.
Sure.
I mean, but what's happened to the person that is?
So what that is that's those neural pathways that have been carved out. So whether that's genetic or whether that's
okay, so it's already there.
Yeah, for a large amount of people it is. Now, not saying that you can't form that. Obviously, if I went out and I used opiates every day,
you would
start using them, my body physically would start to crave them. Now, when it comes to the brain, I'm not sure what that would do, right? But my body would physically crave them. Once I remove, so what it looks like to be in that withdrawal, like my body's starting to crave it, is I'm constantly slamming my brain with dopamine, right? And it's just, I mean, overflooding it so much to where my brain decides I don't need to make anymore because it's coming from somewhere else. And once you pull that away and there's no more dopamine coming in, your brain's not making any either. So that's where that withdrawal and that's where that comes from as far as like from a brain chemistry point.
Yes.
I mean, there's obviously way more to withdrawal.
And so when someone tries to stop, that's why they can't.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's why it's so hard because it hijacks that reward system of dopamine in your brain and says, you don't need food or water.
Just go do this again. You'll feel fine.
Yeah. You don't need to, you don't need friends or family or your kids don't matter. Drugs matter. And that's what the brain is telling you when you do that. Yeah.
Jeez. So your work is someone's coming in, they are addicted to primarily, what do you see right now?
I mean, opiates are obviously at the top.
Massive,
yeah. I mean, that is just the number one thing that we see mostly.
And that, I have these discussions like, is that someone buying them off the street because now people are like selling it because it's addictive and you can get a hold of it? Or is it because somebody had a back surgery and they got addicted, or both?
It really depends on... With
like who's showing up with you? People buying
with our demographic, it is mostly the people that are buying them off the street, solely because by the time they get to us, they've gotten to the point of where they're past getting prescriptions, because of either their socioeconomic status or their family support, whatever that looks like. Most of the time, by the time they've gotten to us, they are past that point. Not always, but generally speaking, I would say that's typically the case. Yeah.
So what do you guys do with them? What do you do to help somebody with the therapy side? And what is the emotional side of that? Like, how does emotion play into the therapeutics of all that? And then generally, what is the therapy? Like, how do you help somebody?
Yeah. So typically in substance abuse treatment, we do a lot of what's called motivational interviewing, where you are pulling out what the client wants, and kind of using, it's kind of like using their own words against them, right? Like, trying to figure out what they want and using that to motivate them. And then cognitive behavioral therapy, which is pretty base for a lot of different stuff.
Getting them to have it be their own idea.
And attacking cognitive distortions, and things like cognitive distortions are like, you're always putting yourself down, or I like to call them like the high school football coach, where they always point out your wrongs and not your rights.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's like one of the big cognitive distortions, is that you're either too hard on yourself or, another one is like over exaggeration of things. There's many cognitive distortions that can play into that.
So you're working through
addressing those. Yeah. And one of my favorite forms that I like to use is called rational emotive behavior therapy. It's an offshoot of CBT.
Okay.
And what that is where you have something that happens to you, and whatever that activating event is, you have a response to that, right?
Yep.
Whether that's an emotional response, whether that's good or bad, but that is what makes you act in a way, right?
Okay.
So how I believe or how I feel about a situation is really going to impact what my reaction is.
Okay.
Now, what we teach with REBT is that if you can interrupt that, emotional reaction before you act, you're going to get a positive response versus a negative response.
Wow.
Right? So
I feel like I could use this. I mean, I feel like I needed like some personal training in this right now. But yes.
Yeah. So that's what we teach. And that's a lot of stuff that we do with relapse prevention.
So give a hypothetical. So if I've, whatever, got shot and then I have a reaction, and then the way I think about what happened, if I could step in and actually, just kind of have a moment of awareness, a moment of consciousness where I say, I want to shoot somebody back. Yep. I want to hurt myself. I want to hurt them. I want to quit my job. I want to whatever. Like, is that what you're saying? Like, teach them to engage with what they're thinking and
that
feeling?
That can be a way. Necessarily, like you said, if someone hurts you and, you have a negative reaction about that, you have a negative emotion surrounding that. Yeah. If you could interrupt that before you get there, you have two pathways you can go. You can either, harm them back and get retribution, or you can forgive them. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think if we can interrupt that before it gets
what is
to
the interrupt?
negative,
how do you teach them to interrupt it?
Sure. Yeah. So that's, that I was talking about with coping skills.
Yeah.
When we identify our triggers, to whether that is addiction or mental health or
you can
whatever that may be. Yeah. You can kind of, once you learn those, you can anticipate that. And even if you don't anticipate it and it happens, if you have an effective coping skill to deal with that. So one of my favorite ones that people always laugh at me, is like just the interruption coping skill. Like,
I love this.
Whether that's like, it just gets you to reframe. So that can be like, oh, I'm blowing off steam because I'm angry and I'm just gonna take a stress ball and I'm just gonna throw it against the wall 10 times. Like whatever it is, it gets you out of that instant, like that emotional reaction to something. Whether that's a trigger to relapse for substance use, or whatever that is, that gets you in the right headspace to turn around and say, okay, I should talk to someone about this. Or, okay, I know that X, Y, and Z is true. I need to not react emotionally to this.
Yeah. Now, when you describe all these things, some of it sounds, this is going to sound condescending, and I don't mean it to.
Sure. Because
I think that what you're describing is in ways the kind of thinking and self evaluation, self-care that people don't typically do every day. Like even just people that aren't necessarily struggling with substance abuse.
Sure, absolutely.
But it sounds like you're teaching basic cognitive skills. Yeah. And it's somewhere along the lines, the substance, the whatever experience, whatever, it's like it never clicked. So maybe they didn't have a good support system, or they didn't have anyone teach them, or they never had anybody work through that. So then their natural outpouring of problems from addictive substance abuse turns into this inability to do things that we kind of assume an adult is supposed to be able to do.
Yeah. Addiction delays that kind of brain development and emotional development, whatever that may be. So really, if you look back at, one person started using substances, you can see a lot of behaviors and characteristics of someone that, if someone started using at 16, they're going to have those similar things.
It stunts their growth, right?
But so if you're started using substances at 16, you're looking at the functioning of a 20-year-old, basically. Don't quote me, that's not science, but
yeah, right. No.
That's anecdotal, but it's there, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're looking at the problem-solving skills, because they've never had to use problem-solving skills without substances. I think Katie mentioned the same thing when she talked about her eating disorder and kind of using that as a way to cope with things, or not necessarily control, but
find agency.
And that same thing with substances. She mentioned that when she was talking about substances. I assume she knew I was coming in, so she didn't dive too deep into that.
She didn't. She didn't know you were coming, but I think that there is that's the idea.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to make the leap with substance abuse, which seems so overtly, obviously, whatever, some type of problem where an eating disorder, people are going to go, what is that? I think a lot of people
it's masked.
Masked. A lot of people think that an eating disorder is like a rich girl's problem.
Yes.
You know,
and
so
it's
and it's not.
Yeah.
It's an emotional problem, and you're in a like an agency problem, a control problem, and instead of going to X, you went to Y.
Yep.
And your brain's doing similar things. So I think that's all the reason that she wanted to make that leap, so that people could know what an eating disorder is. But okay, you mentioned a word, and it's kind of a hot word right now. A lot of people, even jokingly, talk about triggers. Oh, that's my trigger. You know, you hear people on these shows or whatever. They're using what's a trigger? Because you made a comment about how if we can identify our triggers, then we can interrupt or intercept reactions and stuff. So can you give like a general definition of a trigger and normalize it for us a little bit?
Yeah. So a trigger is anything that happens that leads you to think about either your substance use, your mental health disorder, anything along those lines. So a trigger can be any event. It can be any. For instance, you're wearing an orange hoodie right now. Like it could be, if I'm a victim of domestic violence, or if I'm a victim of sexual assault and my attacker was wearing an orange hoodie, that can be very triggering to somebody like that has experienced that.
And the trigger is that whatever is making you want to solve your problem.
It's the emotional response to that.
Okay, so the emotional response to some event in the past, or something that's making you think of an event in the past.
Correct. Or think of something, like think of drugs, or think of alcohol, or think of,
So for some people, like if you see me in the orange hoodie, it could make you think, if you've used substances to cope, I want to use, because that trigger is making me emotional.
If the person I was buying drugs from also wore a North Face orange hoodie, then
right.
I mean, that can be,
I see.
That's overgeneralization of that, but like to simplify it a little bit, that's what that looks like.
So it's like, now with triggers, are we always talking about something that triggers you to do something destructive, like some type of addictive behavior or whatever? Or can you use the word trigger in the sense that people do, like when someone cuts me off, it triggers me to honk the horn? Like, is it and it's just like on a scale, like there's like a spectrum of triggers, or is it more related to dysfunctional behavior?
I think that using the term trigger like that is dangerous.
Yeah. And because people, I think, don't understand that.
Correct.
They're just like using the term that they think they heard on some counseling podcast, and now they're like, that's a trigger for me. But it's not really, if it's not leading to a destructive behavior.
Yeah, I think.
Or intense emotional response. By
definition, like in a Webster dictionary, I'm sure that is what a trigger is. You know, something that activates something, right?
Yeah, activate.
But in culture today, like I think we have to be aware that it's almost like demeaning to use that word to
for
people
someone who
struggle with that, right?
Yeah.
Like, it is difficult.
Sure, sure. No, yeah, that's good. Okay, so everything you just described about, well, anything else you want to share in terms of mental health, what you do, because I do want to go to how this plays in the church.
Sure.
But is there any other kind of groundwork in terms of what you do, what mental health is, what you care about, before we kind of talk about mental health in the church?
I always, when I talk about like addiction and the clients that I serve and that I've worked with in the past and currently, I just always like to say that, like, have compassion for people who are going through that kind of stuff. I know it can be difficult for family members that are.
Well, let's talk about that.
Are the family members of people who are using these substances? Because oftentimes, people who are using substances are very manipulative, and that is due to that neural pathway I was explaining about rewards. That look like my respect for you isn't important anymore. I'm going to steal what I need to steal and do what I need to do in order to get my substances or alcohol, right? So I think just having compassion for them and understanding that like unconditional love can go a long way.
It's probably what you have to have in order to deal with someone that's suddenly, if you're a parent and your kid's addicted and they suddenly hate you, which is kind of a normal phenomenon with kids anyway.
There's two ways to go about that. Like, oftentimes people say, oh, well, people who struggle with addiction need to feel the weight of their consequences in order to change, which that may be true, but there's a tactful way to go about it.
Is that true?
Sometimes. It depends on who the person is. It's not an exact science. Some people, if they continue just to be coddled, then they'll just continue to do what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes
what's that called?
Enabling.
Enabling, yeah.
So there's a fine line between enabling and showing that unconditional love. But I think when you get real with yourself and say, my unconditional love, because I love you, I can't continue to do this anymore.
Continue to do
right?
This.
I think that's much, much different than just saying, go away, right?
Yeah.
Or because then that's showing like I don't love you anymore, and that's showing that like when you set the boundary and say, look, I love you unconditionally, and I can't condone this anymore, and I'm not going to enable you. When you're ready to get clean, I am here for you, and I will support you.
So when someone is in that pattern and they just you set a boundary, I can't condone this anymore. I won't be around this anymore. I'm not going to give you any more money. You can't live here anymore. Do you just set those boundaries and then kind of wait for them to come back?
Yeah. I mean, that is typically, what you would do is if that's the route you're going to go. I would suggest that people, if you're, struggling with this as a family or just want more knowledge on it, I would read a book by David Sheff. It's called Beautiful Boy, and I'm sure you've seen the movie on Amazon. They made a movie about Steve Carell's in it. So I would read that book. It is from a parent's perspective. His son Nick went through addiction. He also wrote a book called Tweak, and it's pretty good. But A Beautiful Boy talks about David Sheff shares how he was addicted to his son's addiction and how he was running around always trying to pick up the pieces for his son, and all this sorts of stuff, right? And when he finally set that boundary with him, did it take some painful things to see, he had to see some painful things his son went through in order to get to recovery.
Yeah.
I mean, he had to see his son, under a bridge, selling his body for crack cocaine. Or for methamphetamines.
Yeah.
And he had to see that, right? And
which is it hard? That's why people don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
They can't see their baby, boy, girl, whatever, friend take themselves to that extreme.
Yeah. And a lot of times, is this a fine line? It's hard.
So I appreciate this because classically I'm, kind of like, well, you're enabling, you need to set a boundary. You can't hold your hand out to them if they're going to pull you in the pool with you. It's like, that's
easier to pull someone down than
Yeah. So like you have to stay there, but then does setting the boundary, like what are the statistics? Like do people do well if you act like, is it the better play? If you hold the boundary, let them suffer on their own accord until they come back.
So again, it depends. I've worked with two different populations in the field I've been in. So I've worked with people who are privately insured, and then I've worked with people who are uninsured or Medicaid insured.
Okay.
So I have two perspectives on that, right?
Yep.
Like the people I worked with mostly when I was doing private insurance work.
Now, these are people that are in a higher socioeconomic status
Absolutely.
and have a stronger support system.
Yes, they are typically employed full time. They have health insurance through their wives or spouses or through their work, whatever. But a lot of the people that we would see come in there were under the age of 26 because they were on their parents' insurance still.
Okay.
So with that population, definitely setting that boundary and letting it go.
That helped more.
Yes. Anecdotally, I would say, like from what I've seen.
Okay, that makes sense.
In Columbus, in a private treatment center like that, yes, that would help exponentially
because they kind of realize my resources are running out. They have some sense about them that they realize they're hurting the people around them. They're hurting themselves. And that somehow because they had support that clicks for them.
Yes, because they have been in the care of their parents or living in their parents' house, and
now they can't. But
right?
someone that doesn't have anything, take it away. I don't care.
It's hard. Yeah,
wow.
that is hard as well. I mean, when someone, under that age of 26, like I said, if they're still there, they have that kind of stuff, and you take that away, they're like, now I need to grow up.
Yeah, now it's time to grow up.
Like now I need to get it. But if you do that to someone who's 50
and they don't have anything, what do you take? You can't take anything away from me.
It's going to get a lot worse, in most cases.
So then in that case, if you're reading the different scenarios and you're looking at one where someone doesn't have anything, what's the play? I hate to use that word, but what's the good action to do? By
that time, they typically don't have anyone left who is supportive if they've been using for that long.
Right.
It depends on how long as well. So, I mean,
I've
had people when I was working in private, insurance, residential care that, were in their 50s and 60s and, had jobs and families, and they had, things that were supportive and just started drinking 3 years ago, after you're retired or after I had more leisure time, I just started drinking every day. Now I can't stop. In that case, there's some more room to play with that. But if you're talking about someone who I'm working with now, who's uninsured and homeless,
is it just provide for them?
There's not much you can take from them.
So what do you, is it like, okay, compassion means give them a place to stay or no? Like, I mean, if they're in care, you can't give them care, right? Because that doesn't help.
Well, the thing is, for someone like that who's struggling with that, the best thing you can do is just encourage them every time you see them. I'll take you where you need to go. I'll take you to
So these people aren't in care.
I'll take it
because they won't go.
Yeah.
I gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
The people that do come are there, but
They're
if
there
you're
to work
dealing with
through it.
someone outside,
I gotcha.
That is in that situation, the best thing you can do is just always constantly tell them like, hey, I'll take you.
I'll take you. I'm here for you.
I'll take you to treatment.
Yeah.
When you're there, I'll bring you $20 a week to get some snacks out of the vending machine.
Yeah,
I'll bring you cigarettes, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, just to get him to go.
Sure.
And that may sound like you're bribing them to go to treatment.
No, yeah.
But once they're there,
that's where the work.
A lot of times things click. The hardest thing is to go in.
Yeah, to actually submit yourself to that.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, so how this plays in the church, what I love is that you've unintentionally you've set this groundwork for all the types of, at least generally speaking, many different types of care, the precision, the wisdom, the practices, the therapies that help someone who's is in an addictive state. And it's funny, this is a church podcast, right? We haven't had one conversation about how, the answer is pray for them, tell them a Bible verse, whatever you have it, lay hands on them, which that doesn't mean we don't care about those things. But I want to hear from you and your heart on how just Tony, just give me both barrels, like any frustration you have with the church's disposition towards mental health, what it looks like that frustrates you, and then what you think it should be.
Yeah, absolutely. So my major, no, I'll use church as a whole, not specifically
just,
514.
Yeah, right. Sure, no, yeah.
But
the Big C
church. Yeah, the Big C church. I have a really hard time, and I struggle with people when they talk about praying mental health away. That it really rubs me the wrong way because it's not just something that you can pray about and it's gone. I think that praying for that person, absolutely. That would be great. But pray for the wisdom and the strength it takes to beat the stigma and go into treatment.
Yeah.
Right. And admit that they have a problem.
Yeah.
Pray for God to move them to seek the help they need, and get the resources they need. I think that is vitally important. Like you can't just, I can't just sit here because I'm depressed. I can't just sit here and constantly pray that the stuff's going to go away.
Yeah.
Like while that's great, I think there needs to be an action step, right? Like God didn't make counselors and didn't make people in this field to study and understand if he could take care of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There's just, I mean, you go to a doctor for a broken bone, so go to a counselor when you need some help, right?
Yes.
I mean,
and in the church, I mean, so depression, just because you hit on that, but then generally, depression, explain that. Like, so people are depressed, and the church, there can be this tone of, well, here's why you're depressed, because you don't have enough faith, because you don't believe in God. You haven't da-da-da-da-da. What do you say to that?
I think that's massively toxic.
Yeah.
I think that, and to be frank, I just don't think it's true.
Right.
Like, I think that people who struggle with mental health sometimes have the strongest faith, right?
Yeah.
Because of what they've been through.
Yeah.
And just because somebody is currently struggling with anxiety or depression doesn't mean that they just need to be more faithful.
Yeah.
I think it means that they need to pray for support, and that the ecclesia needs to gather
and do what they do. The body,
right?
Yes,
you need to
koinonia.
have that community of people to say, "Look, you're not okay.
Yeah,
like let me help you." And presenting that in a healthy way. I don't think that we can just say, oh, I prayed about it. And sure, that can put your stress at ease. That can put some of your anxiety about a situation at ease. We're not talking about anxiety over a situation. We're talking about...
Yeah, we're not talking about anxiety. Your in-laws are coming to town.
Yeah, we're talking about like an actual diagnosable like anxiety disorder, right?
Yes.
So I think that like people mess that up a little bit.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because the term anxiety, again, it's kind of thrown around like trigger.
Yep.
Where when we talk about, Paul says, be anxious for nothing, which I talked about in one of the last episodes. Well, he's talking about, I've learned not to completely fret over not having my needs met while I'm in jail, because I've learned how to have a little, and I've learned how to have a lot, and people send me stuff. Thank you, Philippians. So be anxious for nothing. But he's talking about having his daily needs met.
Correct.
He's not saying if you have anxiety residing in your body because of whatever, some type of predisposition, which I do want to talk about nature versus nurture, and both in the combination of that and disease versus, but generally speaking, however anxiety got there, or depression in your body, in your mind, it's not something that you can just go, I need to just wake up today and just pull up my bootstraps and just do better.
Yeah, no,
I just need to do better. Where it's like, like if the in-laws are coming to town, I get anxious. If I have certain meetings, I get anxious. And I do need to be like, okay, this is anxious. I'm nervous. I got to process the emotion and all that stuff. And that's all fine. But then there's the truth, right? Sometimes anxiety gets thrown into, so you're anxious the in-laws, you're anxious about the meeting, you're anxious about the surgery. Well, you should be. It's nerve-wracking, but it's not a disorder. And a good conversation with someone who cares about you listens to your anxiety. I'm nervous. I'm having surgery. Well, it's scary. I know. You go under. Have you had surgery before? Yeah. What was that like? You let them process. You
that's what we call the worried well.
Yeah.
Is that people who they don't have a mental health diagnosable disorder, but they have some issues going on, right?
Yeah. So there's levels of all this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not necessarily that like everyone can benefit from a counselor, right?
Yes.
I mean, everyone has those worries that you were just talking about. Like everyone has something that's there.
Yes. And the church should not come along and just say, the answer to this is for you to pray.
Yeah.
And not be anxious, because people that have faith aren't anxious. Which I just have such a problem with that.
I agree.
Well, I
just kind of laughed because like
it's weird, because like I feel like Jesus was anxious.
Yeah,
I feel like when he was in the garden, he was bleeding. He was sweating blood. So he was anxious because in his body, he knew what was going to happen.
Have to go through.
So imagine going to Jesus and be like, "Dude, why are you anxious? You know you're going to raise from the dead."
Yeah, but did Jesus have anxiety disorder? No,
he did not.
About a situation.
He was anxious about a situation.
You're right, exactly. Like, what's going to happen. You're going to raise from the dead. So why are you anxious?
Yeah,
he's a human.
Yes,
he's he's human and God.
Yes,
like, he has those human struggles as well. Like I think that's important. Yeah,
and I mean, like when he goes and he, there's this kind of idea too. I don't know if it's connected loosely. Just emotions. Certain emotions are wrong in the church. Whatever. Sadness. Don't be sad. You can't be sad. You should be joyful. And it's like, well, Jesus weeps. when, Lazarus is dead because his sisters are weeping and he connects with them emotionally. And he knows that they're going to he's going to raise them. So it's like, imagine going to Jesus and saying, why are you crying? Like, you stop crying right now. I mean, so emotion's a good thing. I think we've talked about that before.
Agree.
I think it's important. So in the church, this idea of when someone is struggling with mental health, and Rick Warren, I think, and Kay Warren have done some good work on this, because Rick Warren's son committed suicide, struggled with mental health for a long, long time. And he's actually the first person that said it, what you said about the broken arm.
Oh,
if you have a broken arm in the church. Now, there are some people, so this gets into what is God doing with healing? Because there are some people that believe that if you don't have any faith, that's why you're sick anyway. You shouldn't be sick. If you had faith, you wouldn't have cancer. But then it moves into the mental health space, and it's certainly just because you think those things and take every thought captive and all this stuff that doesn't mean what it means in the Bible. It's like, so people are like, you don't have faith because you have these types of worries and anxieties, and God would heal you if you believed. Well, you take that to the bone, and it's like, well, that doesn't happen there.
No, like
your brain is struggling. There's chemical dysfunction.
Yeah.
Your bone breaks, and suddenly it's like, oh, well, that's normal. Go to the doctor. You should get a cast.
Yeah.
Well, how come we don't view mental health the same way is the question.
Yeah, I have two things. One, I don't want to sound pretentious. You said he committed suicide. And just completed is more of a appropriate term, I think. Just
no, I appreciate that. Yeah,
just because committed, I feel like it feels like, we kind of go around like a person first language, right? And committed sounds like he did a crime.
Yes. Yeah. But this language, this is great. Why? This is the type of stuff, Tony, that a lot of people are like, come on, that's BS. Like you're being sensitive. But it's not.
It's not.
So to explain why there's a better term, because the term represents a disposition about what's happening in the world.
There's a negative connotation to it that when someone says the word committed versus completed, it feels like a crime, right?
Yes.
It feels like I got a felony because, I suffered from this ailment and I ended up ending my own life.
Right.
And that's not the case, right?
Yeah.
They were struggling and they may have had, attempts in the past.
Yeah.
And they happened to complete this time.
Yeah.
They didn't commit a crime because they, wanted to find a way out or didn't see another way out of what they were struggling with.
And people look at that and they do all kinds of bad theology. They think it's an unforgivable sin. The Catholic Church has taught that indirectly.
I grew up Catholic, I'm aware.
and it's not biblical.
Yeah.
The unforgivable sin has to do with the Holy Spirit and the presence of God casting out demons, actually. The idea was, in that passage, if you read it in the Gospels, is that there's demons being cast out, and then the idea that Jesus is getting at is, well, if demons are casting out demons, then that doesn't make any sense. This has got to be the movement of God. And if you disagree with God doing this, then you're kind of disagreeing with God's presence in the world. And that if you disagree with the presence of God's healing in the world, then you don't agree with God's presence in the world. So you can't, that means your relationship to God is off kilter. It doesn't compute. So it's not a commentary on committing suicide or an unforgivable sin and all this stuff. But I think what's so important is that we have to show we understand that when someone is contemplating suicide or they have attempts, there's more going on.
Yeah.
And if we see it the right way, they're struggling, they're hurt. Instead of having a broken bone, they've got something going on in their brain. They've got a trauma. They've got a predisposition. They've got a disease, and they need serious help to be able to overcome that. Now, I do believe that all of these broken ailments in the world represent a form of darkness and spirituality that was never supposed to be.
Oh, yeah.
We're not supposed to break our bones. We're not supposed to hurt one another. We're not supposed to have mental health problems. And of course, God wants us to pray for them. But to your point, the answer to a great marriage is wisdom, working hard, skill. the answer to building a building.
Seeking counsel. That's something that I've talked about before.
Well, I mean, I wrote down in my notes here that when we talk about love and joy and peace and patience, these are things that are called the fruits of the Spirit. Mm-hmm. And I just did some stuff through Easter talking about how the cultivation of the fruit of the Spirit is partnering with God. So the Spirit of God is in you. Nobody just turns patient overnight.
Yeah.
The Spirit of God is teaching you, guiding you. You've made it your aim to be patient. You see the productivity of working on patience. And over due time, with the combination of just trouble in the world and navigating trouble that you didn't plan on, plus focusing on patience, plus asking for God's help, eventually we can actually become these fruits that, people that have patience in our lives.
Yeah.
So anything that is of God in the world now, it's not typically that Jesus is walking around, oh, boom, you're healed. That was a picture, and I think people need to understand this. So this is helping people orient.
You're fine.
Because healing people, a lot of people, well, that's what it should be. So then Jesus heals people and people with real faith. So then John and Peter heal people in Acts. And then it's like, oh, people that have real faith can really do real healing. And if you really believed, then you wouldn't have these problems. That's not actually the mode of the way that God says that the kingdom of God is going to be born into the world. It's through the Spirit of God working through humans who over time cultivate the fruit of the Spirit, which takes time, which takes focus, which takes counseling and wisdom and all this stuff. Like, you have a building here, and you don't just walk up to someone and it's like, build the building. Here's the plans.
Yeah.
You should be healed. You should get it. A building, the Bible says that God made the world with wisdom. So this building was built with wisdom. It took time. It takes tons of different, an architect and engineers and different designers and different outfits and all the different contractors to put something together, like our houses, like anything, for us to think that engineering health back into our lives is just some type of thing. Is kind of ridiculous. Yep. I want to give people that perspective.
No, I agree. There
definitely has to be a pathway. If someone has cancer, to the best of our ability, we figured out these treatments. None of them fix things overnight. So there's a process. I know plenty of people, and I believe you can pray, and I think you should pray, and I think you should ask God for healing. But I think when you ask God for healing, you should understand that God is ultimately going to heal, that in the resurrection, there will be full healing. And so in a way, he's kind of already answered that.
I think it's important too, what you need to be, when you pray for stuff like that, when you pray for healing, this was a message that Bryce did at high school night when I was there. I lead high schoolers as well. And one of the messages is like, you will pray for something, but then you won't wait for the response.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You'll just, or you won't be looking for, you'll be looking for your answer. You'll be looking for the answer God's giving you. Right.
Yes.
So when you pray for that healing, God may give that to you in a very, very different way than healing healing your ailment. It may come in the form of, a family member reaching out, or it may come in the form of, you seeing an ad on TV or the radio for, a treatment center or whatever it may be.
Yes.
It may come in a totally different form.
I think it's all important dialogue. I think also that people miss, generally speaking, that part of the whole New Testament is to be in koinonia with God in suffering. So, the idea of the death and resurrection of Jesus is that, his resurrection is our direction. So when the resurrection happened, it was the beginning of solving the death problem. So those people in Christ, we're bound to Christ. So we will die like he died, and then we will raise like he raised. So we are still in this age where the age of death and the age of life is overlapped. And one day the age of death will go completely away. That's the resurrection of Jesus or of us from the dead. So I know that's a little bit theological, but I think it's important that the Christian, there are many philosophers who listen to what Christianity proposes as what life is all about and say, yep, it's true. Basically, life is all about suffering. It really is. So I'm not saying that God wants people to suffer with mental, not at all. What I'm saying is our general disposition towards the nature of suffering in the world cannot be, at a minimum, well, we should just have faith and then that goes away. Yeah. It's actually kind of part of what we're all still going through.
Yep.
And to be bound to Christ in that is to be bound to the only thing that gives you genuine hope over the suffering that we have. So I don't want to sound like, the guy that doesn't believe that God can heal, because I've seen people get healed.
Yep.
But for the most part, what I see is people getting healed through wisdom, through skill of counselors and doctors. Just like if I want a painting, I hire an artist. I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I think so. I have two things again.
No, yeah, good.
One, what you mentioned about that, just because people suffer doesn't mean that they don't get better and God doesn't heal them eventually.
Yes.
Some of the examples I looked at. So when I was in school, my master's program, I went to Malone University.
Okay.
It's a Christian university. So it was a very interesting aspect that I had a Christian college and university and program that I was at, but doing something that was like a science, right? Like I got a master's in art in education, and counselor education. So that they kind of don't.
They had a little bit of incompatibility.
Yeah. But part of the good thing about that was that through every one of my courses, there was always one question in the discussion post about how this relates to your Christianity and your faith, and what that looks like. And during that, I know I told you I wanted to talk about this book called Cry of the Soul, but what you were mentioning, I think is it's very real that like we go through suffering and then we heal. How God does that is very different, but I mean, just like look at every Psalm written.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, like David, and like Psalm 38, for instance, I have one written down here.
Read it.
He talks about, I have like certain sections of it written down. Like he's got several things that he goes through. I mean, Psalm 38:4, he said, my guilt overwhelms me and my burden's too heavy to bear.
Yeah.
38:7, a raging fever burns his name. My health is broken.
Yeah.
I'm exhausted and completely crushed. My groans come from the anguished heart. This one's my favorite because but
he's not very spiritual.
And it says, my heart beats wildly, my strength fails, and I'm going blind. Dude's having anxiety.
Yo, dude,
you talk about this kind of stuff, and people don't realize that they just didn't have a name for it.
Right.
They all struggle with these. They're humans.
Yes.
Right? Like, they all struggle with this kind of stuff.
Yes.
In Kings, I think it was Job in Kings.
Well, Job is his own book.
He talks about...
Is it in the book of Job or in Kings?
It's in Kings. 1 Kings 19:4. He says, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, he became a broom brush and sat under it and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors.
Yeah.
Oh,
dude, he's at the end. He's at the end of his rope.
Yeah, like the very end. And what did he do for the next? He wandered the desert for another 40 days until he reached the city. It's
countless stories of
and that's just a few. I just pulled them.
Noah has a drunken and falling apart at the kind of end of his story.
Yeah.
David has the running, Bathsheba, but then also running from Saul being killed, hiding in caves, Elisha hiding in a cave, wanting to just end his life, feeling a total weight of depression. I think that one thing people, miss about the scriptures is that, when we want to, we take the scriptures and we use it, and this may be a little strong language, like a weapon or a way to manipulate people, a way to say, you see, we all need to be like David. Who David was a man after God's own heart. And then it's like, okay, well, what about when he said this and did this and he had all these things? And the scriptures are really showing us the narrative of God interacting with human beings, specifically through this nation, now through all of us and to all of us, and his covenant faithfulness to us, despite our lack of faithfulness. I mean, that's maybe... in terms of the entire narrative of the Bible, that might be the spine of the whole thing. God's faithfulness to his project with humanity, despite the fact that we seized autonomy and tried to rule ourselves. So you're looking at humans.
Yeah, I mean, and God uses them.
And God, yes.
Like in big ways,
big
right?
ways.
Like, and like David didn't just get better by himself.
Yeah.
And by praying, right? Like that was part of it.
Yeah.
That was a big part of it.
Yeah.
But like he had people around him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shouldn't you pray whether things get better or not?
Yeah.
I mean, do we only pray now because of some result? Yeah. How about just you're in connection with God and you believe that even if the world turns into a nightmare, you trust that he's God, you're not? I mean, read the book of Job. It's basically God saying, none of you could possibly understand why the world works the way it does. So you should just worship me. Because if I gave you control of horses and the oceans for a day, you wouldn't know what to do with it. Mm-hmm. So your wisdom, not my wisdom. You guys have a glass ceiling. I don't have a glass ceiling. I recently listened to this podcast about wisdom, and it showed this thumbnail-sized image of something from the Hubble telescope. And if you put your thumb up to the sky, that's how big of a portion of the sky it was taking a picture of. And in the picture of it, there were, I think some thousands of galaxies. Mm-hmm. All right, thousands of galaxies. And there are planets in those galaxies that no one will ever see, that no one knows about, but God made them and he has complete control over them.
Yep.
And so part of God's argument to Job and to his friends and all that is, I'm like doing something that's so outside of your bandwidth to comprehend how the world works. For you to think that it's just cause and effect, for you to think that if you do wrong, you get in trouble. If you do right, you don't. And it's that simple. You're wrong. Yeah. I'm way above that.
It's almost negligent.
I'm way beyond that. And if you just try to think for a moment about if you think you could put a horse together, you couldn't. Mm-hmm. So my point is, like, I think that we need to have a relationship with God that is not just results, not just wanting him to fix, not just wanting it, but just to be in awe of him, to know that he's doing things we'll never comprehend, and to actually have the wisdom to be like, I don't understand this and I don't need to. I'm never going to understand this. So some of that's the way it is with mental health. It's kind of like, oh man, I mean, I have a brother who is, he's diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, heavy drug use in his teens, heavier drug use in his 20s, 4 kids, abandoned those kids, has been arrested 4 times, 1 time by the Secret Service impersonating FBI agents. I mean, been in mental hospitals, attempted suicide. Is that the right? Yeah. Attempted it. Yeah. Multiple, at least 1 time. I mean, I look at my life and my family and I don't really understand how it all.
This is where you want to go nature nurture, right?
Yeah. Go there for a second, because
I assume that's what you wanted to do.
Well, because I kind of feel like people play both sides of the fence, whatever side plays best for them.
Yeah.
So if you're a parent and you have a kid who is mentally challenged or whatever, has some kind of mental health diagnosis, then it's nature, but if you're a kid and you've been struggling your whole life, then it's nurture. It's their fault.
Sure.
And I think that it's probably a mix of the two.
Oh, it definitely is.
And that's what science would say.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, is there that genetic predisposition? Sure. I mean, there's, just like there's a genetic predisposition to diabetes or cancer or lung disease or, whatever. I mean, it is for everything, right?
Yeah.
There's a specific gene that causes that.
Or some type of sensitivity to some type of environment, and you put multiple things into that equation and it just doesn't turn out well.
Yes, but I mean, so that has to do with the nurture aspect,
part,
right?
I mean,
like
add that, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so if you're growing up in a dysfunctional family where you don't have support and you aren't loved and taken care of and your needs aren't met, right?
Yeah.
And you're constantly living I want to talk about briefly, just like the Maslow hierarchy of needs. What you can't work on the next one until the first one's met. And the first one, the basic one is, shelter and food.
Yes.
Like if you don't have food, water, and shelter, like what can you work on? You're not worried about that higher level, kind of stuff and learning about that kind of stuff. If your basic needs aren't
survival.
met. Yeah. So, I mean, I think like if that's happening, your development is arrested, right? Your growth is stunted.
Yes.
Whether that's your brain,
and
your physical growth.
That's the thing. I think the nurture side, we have to get our head around that. Like what we do with our kids, how that works is so important. Yeah. Creating a stable environment.
Yep.
Meeting their needs, letting them be kids, raising them, giving them what they need so that they can develop and grow into people that can be independent.
Yes, absolutely. I think that when you don't do that, and those needs aren't met, now like not is always going to be as serious as, not enough food, water, or shelter.
No, it's emotional presence. It's
correct. When that love and support is not there and not present and not shared, that's why we see so many issues coming out of people in like, I mean, my parents' generation, right? Like they were raised by the baby boomers, and they're like that was like the greatest generation, But I mean, my grandpa didn't tell my dad that he loved him every day, right? And not that that's like the fix all to everything, but like when you look at that, you see all these mental health issues that people are like, oh, it's crazy. They just started having mental health issues in their 50s. Like, no, that was there.
Yes.
They never talk about it.
Yes.
And I think that's important as well. Like in that nurture area, like I grew up very fortunate that my parents were emotionally intelligent about some of this stuff, right? I'm very fortunate for that. And that's part of the reason I am where I'm at.
Yeah.
And that I was aware of this type of stuff. Yes. While there's still issues surrounding that.
But it mattered.
Yeah, it definitely mattered. So I think that's important too. Like the conversation that we have about it. I mean, the more and more I see, with the younger millennials and Gen Z, like I think it's great. Like they just normalize this kind of stuff.
A lot of it's been
talking about it.
Yes.
Right.
And sometimes it gets it's in a, they don't define it quite appropriately, or, they may say because they're having anxious thoughts that they have an anxiety disorder, and it's almost like somewhat saturated with some of this talk.
Yeah.
That it needs to be, be careful, because kids that are really battling through some of these things at a severe level, I agree. I think sometimes it's kind of become a little buzzy.
It has.
I've got anxiety.
But also,
I have anxiety.
I also think that
I'm sure you do to a degree, and that's probably normal because the world is crazy right now. But there's levels of this.
Yeah, but I also think it's good that like they are open about that.
Yeah, to talk about what they're struggling with.
Yes, even like with their friend group.
Right,
I don't know, when I was 15 or 16, I wasn't talking
about your emotions,
about my emotions, and about,
no, you just don't do that.
Like, oh, my counselor told me the other day, or my therapist said, it's like, you didn't hear that,
yes.
What, 10, 12 years ago for me, like I didn't hear that, people don't say that kind of stuff. It was kind of like, oh, did you hear they went to counseling? Like they have to like whisper it. Like,
no, I think counseling needs to be viewed as more of like a lot of people think of it as like the transmission went out of the car, so you got to take it and get it fixed, but it should be viewed more as a oil change, something regular in your life. I mean, counseling gets a weird rap. I mean, I think a lot of people have a problem with it because they go there when things get bad, so they feel like what they're doing is admitting that something's wrong in their life. But counseling should be viewed as like a safe place to have a dialogue that matters.
Yes.
I mean, honestly, when you see it that way, you can go to a counselor, you can pay them, or if you have insurance, to pay for part of it, or go to something free, whatever. And that person is going to sit and talk to you about you and what you're dealing with. And that's it. And they're going to help you, and they're going to help you untangle thoughts and understand the world, and have wisdom and therapies. And I'm
glad you said it like that they're going to help you, not fix you, right?
No,
like,
they're going to help you.
They're going to help you untangle that ball of yarn that you have in your head into, a straight piece that you can use.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And I think that people in the church need to view that in a way, you should care for yourself that way. You should care for yourself.
I agree.
If you have some type of trauma in your past, then you owe it to yourself to go and say, I'm struggling and I want to get better. Just like we would say, you need to go to the gym every day. You need to work. You need to eat healthy. You need to get rest. You need vacations. You need rest, whatever.
Yeah.
Like if you have this going on, go deal with it. But then on top of that, it's something you can offer the world, because if you can straighten out what's going on with you, and I've been to counseling therapy now over 10 years.
Yeah.
I was diagnosed high on the narcissistic scale first time I went. Man, that was a really helpful bit. Like, that was hard. And then it's like, okay, I got to manage this. What does it mean? How do I do better?
Yep.
And they helped me through it. And I can go in there and say, this is what I'm thinking right now. And they're like, well, you have a tendency to think that way. And do you remember why? And it's like, yeah, I do. And you really get to kind of clean out the arteries of all the junk and understand. So that's wisdom. If you don't, I don't know, somebody really, really smart said, know thyself. I don't remember who it was, but I don't know, probably someone that everyone thinks is a bad guy or something. I don't know. But I'll tell you what, knowing what's going on, knowing what happened to you, becoming, stable in a sense in that way so that you can move into the world in a more healthy place.
No, I agree. I think I've been going to counseling for about 3 years now.
Yeah.
And yeah, no, I struggle with what's called persistent depressive disorder, which is formerly dysthymia, which is it's just like a constant low grade depression.
Okay.
That it happened to be a lack of serotonin in my brain, right?
Wow.
So yeah, when you go there, you're able to talk about those things, and some of the things going on in my life, and some of the resentment towards people I have, often
plays into that.
Often has to do with me not expressing my own needs. And then I get bitter and I get passive aggressive about what someone else did because I didn't say that I didn't enjoy that or I did or didn't like that.
So it's like you missed out. You cheated yourself.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason that some of the things I get frustrated about, and that's what I've been working through, right? And all around, whether I have dysthymia or not, I know that now, and I know how to address that, right? And I can, like we talked about earlier, call myself out on those things when I'm starting to feel like that. I can say, look, like these are my needs, and I'm learning how to communicate those effectively, and communicate those clearly, and not, being, hey, I need this now, demandative about it. But learning how to communicate those effectively, and getting your point across is big for me.
That's huge. Yeah. No, I've had many epiphanies like that. I had an epiphany that I was abandoned, and why I have emotions around certain moments in my life that are so overwhelming. It's like a furnace inside. Yeah. And my counselor was like, Joel, your mom moved away when you were 9 to a different state. And I was like, yeah. And? So? Yeah. Tell me something I don't know. He's like, you don't know that was abandonment. Now, if my mom is listening to this is my story, Mom, not yours. You have your story. I know why you left. My story is it was hard that you left and really hard. Let's go back to that. Yeah, go. That is massively important. I feel like we need to tell our truth and our story, and not cater to other people's feelings. Yeah. Whether that is, like I said, she has her reasons for leaving, right? But I feel like that's massively important for people, that we are able to tell our truth and our side of the story and how we genuinely feel. Because if we don't, again, just like I was talking about, if we don't let that show, like we're gonna be scorned. We're gonna have that sour attitude towards it. I think that's important when you talk about that, and that's language that we use in the counseling field as well, especially people with trauma. That's the language. I can tell that came from that comes right from therapy, bro. Yeah. It's like this is my story, and this is my truth, and this is what happened to me, and how I feel about it. And that alone is just therapeutic in the sense that, like, I get to say what I feel. Yep. I get to process that emotion. And so, instead of feeling, so with abandonment, you know, if a coworker or someone doesn't respond the right way, which maybe it's miniature, or maybe my wife doesn't, you know, say something at a certain time. If I'm already feeling this kind of deficit of I have abandonment, then I take out my abandonment feelings on the world around me. And I did that. I did that. It was like this blazing furnace. And he's like, so I kind of learned like, oh, I was abandoned. That's really hard. You need to grieve that. You need to grieve the fact that, you know, it's not just that your mom left at 9, but then she wasn't there when you were 10. She wasn't there when you were 11. So you have all this empty space that you're hurting. So you need to kind of go through the grieving process of making meaning out of that.
Yeah.
And then you can move into the world and not look for everyone else around you to fill your needs, because they never will.
Yep.
But you'll be mad at them, and you'll just ruin your life by making it their responsibility, and really not yours to fulfill your need, but yours to recognize a problem, what it is, and heal. And so I can't, I mean, I think people that don't go to therapy are like, I might even look down on them a little bit, which is not okay.
No,
it's not good. But in my mind, it's not that I look down on them. It's actually what it is I'm like, ugh, I want you to unpack. I want you to unpack that. And usually it's like right in front of people's faces. It's like, so it's like your parents got divorced. Well, that's an easy one.
Yeah.
Your mom got cancer and died when you were 16. And then you just move along. Oh, if you've not actually sat and dealt with that, like that is still playing a role in your life every single day. And wisdom, counseling is going to help you heal.
And even if that's not again, I don't think, you know, everyone has mental health disorders. Like,
no, right? Yes, no, yeah,
even if
exactly.
They're like
There's
one
a
of, like I
difference.
talked about those worried well people, like that can help. You know,
Yes.
that even a short term, like, yeah, I've been going to counseling for 3 years, but even like a short term counseling, like to deal with an issue, right?
Right.
Like
mental health disorder, but also just mental health.
Exactly.
Just because my arm's not broken doesn't mean I don't need to
absolutely
get healthy and work out.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I totally agree. I mean, I think like, if you are one of those people who just has just mental health in general, and if you lost your job, right? You know, go to counseling if you go to counseling once a week for 6 weeks, and you start to resolve those issues about your feelings about it, you're able to get back in the workforce, like, great, awesome. You don't need to utilize counselor anymore. You know, I think that like people often see that as like, you know, if I go to a counseling, I'm going to be diagnosed with a mental health disorder. I'm going to be tagged with that stigma forever. I'm gonna, you know, they have all these things that they think are going to happen. But I think that's very important that you said that about just mental health in general.
Yes. Hey man, we all can grow, right? Like I want to grow. Don't you want to be like, to me, emotion is life in a sense. That's like the way you experience things. I mean, if you're in a bad place emotionally, you can be at Disney World and hate your life. Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about it that way, it's like, oh, it's really not about where you anyway, are. So. Yeah, well, whatever. It can be both. It can be bad in every way for some. But my point, you get my point. Like you got to deal with this inner world and get healthy and work through it, mental and emotional health. I'll end with a story. I'm going to talk about this actually at the leadership conference that's coming up May 17th here at the church. But I was doing a message, and it's just so funny, Tony, like whenever you do a message, people hear sometimes just whatever they want to hear, right? So I was talking about, I think I said something about being authentic and how I wanted to be authentically healthy. And this guy cornered me out there in the hallway after the message. He's like, see? He's like, you know, when you were talking about being authentic, he's like, that's what I tell her. He's pointed to his wife. And I love this guy, and I don't mean any ill, but I told him this. So he'd laugh if he was sitting here. He's like, yeah, that's what happened. But he said, see, I tell her that's why I don't smile, because I'm being authentic. I'm being authentic because I'm mad. Some people just make me so mad. And I said, well, that's good that you're being honest that you're mad. I said, but I would not settle for that in your life. Why would you want to go through your life being mad? It's like, good. I'm glad you said
you're mad.
You recognize you're mad. But now, man, what? Come on, man.
You're going to sit in that?
You're going to sit there?
Yeah.
You're going to like let your light, it's like, oh, I'm mad and I'm going to tell you that I'm mad. Well, good for you.
Well, it's almost.
So I said, go. I said, dude, now you need to go and figure out why you're not, because wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to be mad all the time?
It's almost like
How do you get that
almost
figured
like
out?
that is almost worse than just living in ignorance, right?
Yeah.
Like if you recognize a problem and don't address it, like that's even
that's Chinese water torture.
Yes,
it's like dripping, and you realize it, and your life is.
Oh, I know this is the problem. I'm just gonna put it in the back burner.
Yeah,
I know it's the problem.
I know it's the problem. Exactly.
It's like when you're driving your car and check engine light comes on, and you're like, oh, it's on.
It's
like,
Kramer.
It's there. I'm used to it. Yeah.
Did you like say
and then your car breaks down, right? Like it. Well, yeah, I warned you.
Yeah, I told you the whole time.
Yeah,
exactly. So I was like, I appreciate being authentic, but let's get authentic to be a happier place. And that doesn't mean all the time, but more of the time would be good, right?
Yeah.
It's like, here's a goal. Let's have some mental health. Let's have some emotional health. How about go chase that down instead of telling your wife that you're mad and that's okay? I think really it's that people don't know how to communicate. That's what she's saying. Why are you mad all the time? Why don't you smile? Because I'm mad. Okay, well, I want you to smile. So it's not fake it and act like you're happy. You might need to do that sometimes, but can we get to the root here?
I genuinely want you to smile.
I would like you to smile because you're happy
yeah.
for this moment and it's real, because that would be nice. I really value authenticity. Let's get some authentic health. Anyway. Well, Tony,
that's good.
Dude, thank you so much.
Yeah.
There's so much to learn from you. Thank you for what you do.
Yeah.
You do great work, man.
Thank you.
It's important work. I know plenty of people that have been on the receiving end of the work that you do. And I just hope if anybody listens to this, you're in the church, maybe you have specifically some type of addictive disorder that you're challenged with, or maybe you haven't come to the place where you're ready to recognize it and you've had people tell you. I hope you hear this and know, people want to help, and it's okay to say, yeah, this thing has captured me. It's raptured me, and I need help to get through it. And I hope that you would go to a place like Maryhaven and get some counseling and get some skill, because I do believe that's the wisdom of God that's leading you through that type of growth. And I think that's maybe, if you say it's prayer or it is prayer, the answer to prayer is people like Tony. So thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, absolutely.
And more next time. Hey, thanks everybody for listening. This is The Rest, and we'll talk to you next time.